Hey folks, it's the Metaxas Show. I'm talking to the author of 7 Lessons from Heaven, How Dying Taught Me to Live a Joy-Filled Life. Mary Neal, you died and came back. And so when you did come back, just to get back to the story here, you were not convinced you needed to do the things that you were told you needed to do in heaven. And so you go through this process of figuring it out.
I did. And I woke up every day hoping the plan for my son's life would change, but I woke up every day wondering if that would be the day that he died. And outside of an absolute trust in God's promises, that would be impossible. But I had an absolute trust that if the plan for his life did not change, that indeed great beauty would have come of his life, great beauty would come out of his death. And so I basically tried to just go back to my life, which I might add was sort of impossible after an experience like this. But I kept putting things off until 2009, when one morning I was sort of woken up very early, maybe 4 a.m.
Okay, this is 10 years after the accident.
10 years later. And at this point, I will say that my son did reach his 18th birthday. There were some things that happened leading up to his birthday that made me think that the plan for his life had changed. And actually on his 18th birthday, when he was still alive, I told him this entire story. And on that particular day then in 2009, I was woken up. I was placed on the ground. It was as though God were saying, okay, today you're going to say yes to what I asked you to do. And I oftentimes say that asking for God's will to be done underwater was the first day my life changed. But really, this day in 2009 is truly what changed my life, because it wasn't just a matter of accepting the truth of God's promises, but it was saying, yes, I will be obedient. I will.
Okay, up to this point now, so in these 10 years from 99 to 2009, were you going to church? Would you describe yourself as serious about Jesus or no?
Absolutely.
You were?
Because it was part of every breath. It was, as you described earlier, the truth of God's reality was my reality. And so absolutely. Okay,
so you've given your life to Jesus and all that has changed.
Yes.
And what about your husband?
My husband, I would say, had a very different experience. He, at the time of my drowning, was terrified. He was terrified of losing me. He was, when we eventually made it back to the U.S., I shouldn't have survived then. And he was filled with terror because, fortunately, he really loved me. He couldn't even listen to the whole story.
Yeah, it must have been horrifying. Yeah.
It was horrifying. We still had 4 little kids. I mean, he oftentimes back then said, well, you were off talking to God, but I was changing diapers. I mean, it was a very different experience. He since then has changed. I mean, he grew up in a very actively atheistic household, and I would say that now he is a very spiritual guy. Yeah. He is a very faithful guy. He knows the truth of God's promises.
Yeah.
But during those 10 years, it was very difficult because the first year and a half, I was physically present but not emotionally present. I, like so many people who have a near-death experience, was really very depressed. I couldn't believe that I was here. I just couldn't believe that I was sent back.
Wow.
And that's a common experience.
Okay, so 10 years into this, God wakes you up somehow.
Yes.
Now, I don't know what you mean God woke you up, but you had a sense that this is God waking you up?
I had an absolute overwhelming sensation that, okay, now is the day you're going to say yes. And I said yes. And I spent the next week writing the manuscript for the first book I wrote, To Heaven and Back. And then I did some revisions, and that was that. And I kind of put it to the side.
And you wrote it because you felt that God told you, when you go back, I want you to tell what happened to you.
I was expected to share my experiences with other people. Right. I was given some pretty clear guidelines, and I knew that writing was part of that. Well, for example, I knew that speaking and I knew that writing about it was one of those expectations, because writing is a very efficient way to share your experience with a lot of people. And so I knew that one of the expectations was to write about it. But I'm not a writer. I just really didn't want to do it. I mean,
I am a writer, and I don't like writing either. So
okay.
It's hard work. It's hard work. People don't realize.
Right. So I did that, and then I put it to the side. And then on January 21st, 2009, it was again as though I was shaken awake and said, today is the day you're going to finish this. You are going to complete what I asked you to do. And so I got up and I made some revisions. And when I hit the save button for the final time, you can imagine how excited I was. I was elated.
You were elated because you had done your assignment.
Yes. And my youngest son and I then drove into town to get ice cream and celebrate because I was so happy. And as we were driving into town, I called my older boys who were in the ski training program. Yeah. And it was then that the coach picked up the phone and told me my son had been hit by a car and killed.
I mean, the timing is obviously God's timing.
It was a gift.
It's mind-blowing.
It is. And although I like to say I had all these excuses for not writing, right, I believe it was really an example of God's perfect timing.
Folks, we'll be right back. I'm talking to Mary Neal. You cannot overstate the importance, I cannot overstate the importance of what we're talking about here. Every human being wants to know, why am I on this planet? Does life have meaning? Is there a God? If there is, what is that God like? What am I supposed to do about it? You have lived this, and you now live to answer these questions. That's why you're here. It's why you wrote this book.
Well, I'm not sure I'm here to answer the question entirely of why we're here, but I will tell you that coming to Earth is an incredible opportunity. We are here, and there is a plan for each one of us that's one of hope, and we need to be about God's business. I mean, so many of us just sort of go through our days and go through the motions, and we're just wasting time. I mean, we're just wasting this incredible opportunity.
What is more horrible than that?
Yes.
I've actually talked about this, the idea that this is an outrageous opportunity.
Right. And the question, many people ask me, well, why do we have to come here to learn greater humility, compassion, understanding, kindness, all those things? And I don't have the answer to that. But I do know that this is an incredible opportunity, and we need to take advantage of it.
To do God's will.
Really, it's not only just doing God's will, but it's reflecting God's love to other people.
Well, that's what I mean. In other words, why are we here? And you're saying that we're not just here. God has a purpose for us, and we can't find real joy unless we do what He wants.
It's individual, because my plan is not the same as yours. And one of the problems, I think, is that we talk about, we want to follow where God's leading, but not really, because we want to identify where He's leading us to decide whether we want to do that or not, whether we like that direction or not, or we say, well, no, we want to do that person's job. And as a result, we sort of overlook developing our own talents and our own gifts because we want someone else's gifts. And it's been an interesting journey, to say the least, for me, because, of course, none of this is what I actually wanted to sign up for. But it's been an incredible privilege. Since the writing of that first book, which I might add I didn't actually realize anyone would read, but many people did. And as a result of that, I've had this privilege of an opportunity of speaking with hundreds of thousands of people, listening to their own stories of not only near-death experiences, but really profound spiritual experiences, listening to their life story and being able to share with them my own observations. And it's really remarkable because everyone's worried about the same thing. I mean, everyone has regrets or sorrows from the past. Everyone has anxiety about the future. And everyone is going to face challenge. We're all going to die. Everyone's so afraid of dying that so many people never even live. And we know we are going to face challenges. And the fact is, when you talk about why we're here, we're not here to just have an easy life. None of us ever change when things are easy. We change in response to challenges. We can all look back at ourselves from 15 years ago and see the ways we've changed. None of us can ever imagine the ways we're going to change in the future, but we're going to change in response to the challenges we faced. And my passion currently is to help people face those challenges from a state of joy, because I believe that so many of us chase after happiness, but happiness is so transitory. I mean, it's like shifting sands. If things are good, you're happy. If it's sunny out, I'm happy. If it's raining, I'm not so happy. But that is all based on the external, whereas joy is really what allows us to transcend circumstances. And I believe that joy is based on an absolute trust in all of God's promises.
And how do you get to that place? In other words, I assume when you say God's promises, I assume you mean the promises that are in the Bible.
Yes.
And so I guess you have to be familiar with the Bible, or you have to be hanging out with people who actually believe this stuff.
Yes. I mean, God's promises are pretty straightforward. And they have to do with the fact that God is real and present, that God knows each one of us individually, loves each one of us as though we're the only ones, and has a plan for each one of us that's one of hope. And really, if you don't know anything more than that, that's life-changing. But my passion is not only to have people understand those promises, but to really trust the truth of them. And trust is sort of faith in action. Trust is a choice based on evidence.
Right.
And I wrote the second book as a response to hearing all of these people talk about things and share things and ask questions. Because I believe that every single person can make the same transformation from sort of hoping that it's true, trusting it's true, to an absolute trust that those promises are true. And you don't have to die. You don't have to have a profound spiritual experience. I challenge people all the time not to believe what I'm saying, because my job is not to convince anyone of anything. My job is to share my experiences, and what I really hope happens is they try to prove me wrong, that they try to go home and say, well, you know what, it's easier for her to have trust because she had this incredible experience, but God's not present in my life. Because I absolutely know that if people will actually spend the time, put out the effort to look at their own life, they will absolutely see evidence of God's presence, evidence that can't be made up. You can look at evidence statistically, and there will be enough evidence in every single person's life to be able to realize that statistically that's just not possible.
Exactly. This is what I find funny. We were talking about it earlier, that the evidence for the existence of the God of the Bible it's ridiculously overwhelming, but we live in a world where it's fairly easy to ignore it. I mean, if you turn on the TV, the narrative is not there's a God who loves you and has a plan for your life, and it's okay to give yourself to him. You just don't even hear that.
No, I think one of the problems in our culture, and this is one of the realizations I came to after doing all the research, trying to disprove my own account, is that one of the problems is we're presented with this false choice for our entire life. We either choose to believe in science or we can choose to believe in God.
I'm going to cut you off there because we have one final break and we're going to come back. This is a big point. Folks, it's the Eric Metaxas Show. I'm talking to Mary Neal. Stick around. Hey folks, it's the Eric Metaxas Show. A few minutes left with Mary Neal, the author of 7 Lessons from Heaven. So Mary, you died, and when you talk now, it's different than if somebody else were to say it. But many people dismiss what people like you say. They just think there's no way that can be true. And you said we're presented with this false narrative.
Right. Because we are told we have to choose to believe in science or believe in God and spirituality. And what I've discovered is that is a false choice. It's like saying you have to choose an orange or an apple. The fact is science will always be the means by which we try to understand how things happen. But spirituality will always provide the answer to why. And they coexist very easily. And I know that one of my missions is to point out that false narrative. They can coexist, and they do coexist, and they should coexist in every person's life. We're given the gift of intellectual curiosity, and we should question things. I don't take everyone at face value.
Right.
That would be foolish.
Right.
But at the same time, you also can't discount everything. It's that whole idea that not everything is a miracle, but you'd be foolish to say that nothing is.
Right.
The fact is there are miracles. And the fact is that choosing to trust God's promises is transformational and is life-changing. Many people have said, well, so what? So what does it do for me on a daily basis? Why should I put out the effort to look? And, of course, my real attitude is, well, because this is an eternal issue. This isn't a day-to-day issue. But beyond that, on a daily basis, it absolutely radically changes human interaction. If I come across someone who I don't like, for whatever reason, I don't look like them, they don't agree with me, of course, there's always us and them. If I come across someone I don't like, I can immediately remind myself of two things. First of all, they are as intensely loved by God as I know God loves me, and that changes how I experience them. I recognize that. I look for God within them. I try to feel love for them. And where God's love is present, or where love is present, there's no room for destructive emotion. And so all of a sudden, I start to like them. All of a sudden, it's not me and them, it's us. In addition to which, if someone hurts me, I don't feel emotional response to that. I don't feel anger or resentment, because I can look at that person and I absolutely accept that they have a backstory, that they have a life story that brought them to that point where they hurt me or said something hurtful. And even though I don't know what their story is, I can trust that that story is there. And so it changes my experience of life. And I believe it can change every person's experience of life. And I can only imagine for a moment if everyone on the earth were able to actually accept the intensity of God's love for them and reflect that to the other people. Oh, my goodness. We'd obviously have a very radically different world.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, of course. It's such big stuff. I'm so glad you took the trouble to write the second book, because I know in many ways it's very different from the first book. You really get into some stuff here. It
is. One of the goals of the second book is to not only address all of these questions, but to really lay out a very practical way of making that transformation to trust. And of course, it's not for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone, but it's a very analytical way of collecting information and collecting evidence to try to make that transformation.
We're unfortunately out of time, but it is practical, because people think, what do I do? What do I do? Right. Well, I think first step, buy the book. Mary, just a great joy. God bless you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. It is an incredible privilege.
Folks, I think this was pretty sweet. I hope you'll tell your friends and share it. Share the podcast. Get the word out. Thank you.